Hi, I'm Chelsea.
And I'm Sophie, and we are here to help guide you to the why behind your wellness why.
Come join us on our journey.
There's some controversy with BMI in the health and wellness industry, Chelsea.
There sure is.
BMI stands for Body Mass Index.
Yes, and today we're gonna dive deep into that.
We're going to talk about everything BMI and body fat and kind of the differences between the two and how they're calculated and how they can be used and the information that they give you.
Yes, let's get right into it because we have so much to say, and this is a really good one. So stick around if you want to learn. So let's just talk about the definition of BMI. So I don't love to read word for word, but I'm going to just so there's absolutely no confusion. So this is from the CDC, their definition of BMI. So they say body mass index, aka BMI, is a person's weight in kilograms divided by the square of height in meters. So I'll pause right there. There's a lot of calculators out there that you can just plug in your weight and your height and it makes it a lot easier. But basically, it is a comparison. It's taking your height and your weight and graphing it on a graph. So now I'm continuing with the definition. So they continue to say a high BMI can indicate high body fatness. BMI screens for weight categories that may lead to health problems, but it does not diagnose the body fatness or health of an individual, which I think right there is a little controversial because in the definition it says a high BMI can indicate high body fatness. But then it goes on to say, but it does not diagnose the body fatness. And I have so much more to say, but we'll dive into that in a little bit.
Looking at the chart, it says below 18.5 is considered underweight. 18.5 to 24.9 is healthy weight. 25.0 and 29.9 is considered overweight. And 30 flat and above is obese. And this is the same for men and women, total population.
Yeah. So a lot of people might be familiar with BMI in terms of going to the doctor and getting weighed and hearing their BMI and being told something based on their BMI. But before we dive into all of that and the controversy of it and what our thoughts around it, now that we know the definition, let's talk a little bit about the history. And this is where I could totally nerd out. So, Sophie, you're going to have to reel me in if I go into too much detail, but I'll try to keep it short and sweet. What I think is fascinating about BMI is it actually was not created by anybody in the health industry, no health professional, not a doctor, not a medical professional. It was actually created in the 1830s, kind of by mistake, but also kind of not really. But it was created by an astronomer, a mathematician. I cannot pronounce his name for the life of me, but I think it's Adolphe something with a Q. But I don't know, so I'm not going to try to butcher it. But what he was trying to do is he was studying average human physical characteristics because he was trying to understand back in the 1830s why so many people were dying. And so he was trying to design a pattern or design statistically a pattern of deaths among a large population. So this was really used to be about statistics and not evaluating any person's size or health. He wanted to really use all of these numbers to analyze, not be biased about it, not give someone a diagnosis, but just to analyze the data. And that's simply what it is. He wanted to create this information for values as data points, just data points. That's it. And so I think that's where the controversy starts right there, is that our current BMI charts are not necessarily used to diagnose, but they're used to, I mean, yeah, Sophie, you're shaking your head. I mean, if you talk to a lot of doctors, they'll say they're not used to diagnose, but I guarantee I could get like 50 people on this podcast and they probably feel like their doctor was diagnosing them with something because of their BMI. If you chart out the BMI, if you put all of the numbers on a chart, it makes a bell curve. If you think back to like math class or whatever, it makes a bell curve. And the cutoff point between a normal BMI and overweight BMI is set right in the middle of that bell curve. Basically meaning that over half of the population, if we're using this 1830 mathematicians numbers, over half of our population are going to fall into the overweight and obese category. And what I find even more fascinating is the term overweight wasn't even fully recognized as a medical diagnosis until the American Medical Association listed it as a disease state in 2013. So we're talking about in the 1830s versus 2013, obviously a lot of time in between there. The last thing that I'll add in without going into this whole podcast being about the history, but I think it's important to know. So then some time goes on and this table and this bell curve, what was just used as data points, then ends up getting adjusted for the American population. And it's published by life insurance companies because at this time, a quote unquote healthy weight started to become a criteria for enrollment in life insurance policies. But ironically, it was more of them looking at healthy weight from weighing enough, because at that time when this table was adjusted to be more about life insurance and weight and all of that type of stuff, a lot of people were at risk for pneumonia and tuberculosis. So life insurance policies were not really looking at it from like an obese and overweight category. They were more of looking at it from a healthy weight of, are you weighing enough? So now, fast forward almost 2 centuries later from when it was created, we are still using this BMI chart. And it's comparing individuals to the average man in the 1830s. There's not a differentiation between genders. It's not taking into any consideration about your body composition, your muscle versus your fat. We're going to get into that in a second. It is only taking your height and your weight.
And doesn't include age either.
You're right. It does not include age either, which is another really important thing to think about. So I'm not going to go into any more detail. I'll pause right there. Sophie, what do you have to say so far?
Well, I have to say there is body fat percentage charts. Men and women are separate. They have age groups that are separate, and just how it changes over time and all that. I just don't love BMI because it doesn't, again, tell you anything about someone's body composition, which is like body fat, muscle, bone density, how much water is in your body, whatever, all that stuff doesn't take into consider anything. So I don't personally like it. And the amount of people I've had come for new joins at gyms at my old jobs being like, so my doctor told me I need to lose weight because of my BMI at my annual visit. And I'm like, well, what was it? What did they say? And I'm like, well, we're going to take your body fat and go from there.
Yeah, I can relate to that 100%. I've had so many people come to me and say something along the lines. And I think that's the main problem that I personally have with BMI, is not that it's necessarily being used, because I do think, although, and we're both going to agree on this, we both know looking at body composition is way more of an accurate and better representation of different things we'll talk about in a second. But I think the challenge is we'll also learn when you go through all of that, body fat tools aren't always readily available, and they're not always cost effective. And so BMI is a quick and easy, free chart for doctors to reference and use. The problem that I have with it is that it's being used as a first line assessment, meaning that's what a lot of doctors are looking at first. And the amount of times that I have had clients come to me and say that they just have felt so dismissed by doctors because they'll see their weight and they put it on a BMI chart, and without any other assessment, not looking at blood work, not asking them about their nutrition, not asking them about exercise, not asking them anything else about their life, they're just looking at this chart and they're making an assumption and a judgment. And that is the problem that I have with it, is they're not taking anything else into consideration. And I have personally had clients who are in a quote unquote healthy BMI who actually medically have more problems than some individuals that are overweight and obese. I have clients that are a healthy BMI who have high cholesterol, high blood pressure, all of these different things. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And I have some clients that are considered overweight or obese, and their blood work looks amazing. Their nutrition is amazing. Their exercise is great. And they might be coming to me for maybe body image issues because their doctors have made them feel a certain way. So again, I could go on and on about this because I'm so passionate about this topic, but yeah.
I am totally with you. And I'm going to give my doctor at Northwestern, Dr. Nair, a shout out because she gave me like the full 30 minutes. She asked me 50 questions about my life, my lifestyle, what I eat in a day, my exercise, what it looks like, how my sleep is. So many questions that I was actually surprised.
I love
She
that.
was like, yeah, what do you eat in a day? All these things. I was like, well, I like know my macros, what they like should be from Chelsea, and like what they are, not fully meeting them. But like it was so good. And I've told all my clients to go see her. But I'm with you. Like I understand that it is quick and easy and very time effective, but it should be taken with a grain of salt. And I wish there was some way that like our body fats could be taken at the doctor every like 5 years or 10 years, something like that.
I just even wish the conversation would be made. And it sounds like, because again, I don't want to say every single doctor out there is doing this, but again, I think if we ask 50 people, I would say the majority of individuals probably have not a great experience with that. And so it's even like, I think some people are probably going to be surprised listening to this of like, oh, I didn't even know that's how BMI was calculated, or I didn't know the history of it, or I didn't know there were even tools to take my body fat. And so it's like, I just wish that, okay, if it's not accessible to do a test at this point, which I agree with you. I think it should be. I think that goes into the whole health insurance conversation, which I'm also not going to get into. But I do think, I think it's crazy it's not readily accessible in the day and age we're living in. But if it's not readily accessible, then at least we should be having the conversation. And that's where I struggle with it. And I struggle with it because that's something that can easily be changed. And it all goes back to what they're learning and how they're being taught in medical school and how they're trained, doctors I'm talking about. So it's a really easy change for doctors just to like have a quick conversation with a patient and actually treat them like a human and look at other factors.
So I totally agree with you, Chelsea. And I have to say, I learned how to take body fat my freshman year of college as a kinesiology and sports exercise science major. So maybe it's like eventually down the line, it could get to the point of when they take your vitals, they can do a skin fold test, which is 3 measurements on the right side of your body, which the accuracy is plus or minus 3.5 to 5% with that. But again, that would be better and tell you a little bit more about your body composition.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm excited to dive into you teaching us the different types of ways to take body fat, but you're exactly right. Like, okay, yes, skin folds might not be the gold standard of how you take body fat, but it's a heck of a lot better than using something like BMI to tell someone about their health, you know? The last thing that I'll mention about BMI is, and I think you'll talk a little bit about this with body fat, is athletes. So again, when we're talking about body composition, a lot of athletes, and especially like professional athletes, football players who might have a lot of muscle mass on them, and depending on their height, they're easily in the obese category. And some of them, again, depending on what sport they're playing and what position, like they might have a lot of body fat on them, but a lot of them also have a shit ton of muscle mass on them. And it does not mean they're not healthy. They might not be, but most of them are.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And like Olympic lifters, and again, people with a lot of muscle mass that might be shorter are, like you said, considered obese or overweight, which is crazy because they're probably 6% body fat.
Yep. It's wild. So let's dive into talking a little bit about body fat, how to take and measure it. Educate us, Sophie.
Well, I don't have much to say about body fat, but I will say body fat versus muscle. One is an active tissue and one is a non-active tissue. Which one is it, Chelsea?
Muscle is an active tissue and body fat is not.
Ding, ding, ding. It doesn't mean we don't need any body fat. That's all I have to say. Because especially actually as we get older, you are supposed to gain a little bit more of body fat. I think due to like falling and just protection of like your joints in that situation.
I don't want to interrupt you, but for those who might not know this, do you want to just really quickly define what you meant by active tissue?
So by an active tissue, I mean it contracts and relaxes and uses protein to build. It breaks down when you do things, builds back up when you rest and feed it properly.
Basically working. It's serving a purpose in our body.
Yes, where our body fat is kind of just sitting there, which like babies are born with like more brown adipose tissue, more brown fat matter for thermal purposes. I'm not totally sure the age that like kind of goes away, but
Yeah, that's a good point, which we don't have to get into all of this because I feel like this could be a long conversation too. But I think the other point we should make is there's different types of fat. Not all fat is the same, and there's
yes,
different types. And there's also, from when we're talking about like a health perspective, there are different types of fat that we do want to look at more when we're talking about health, especially like risk for disease and that type of stuff. So maybe we'll talk about this when we talk about the different types of body fat testing, but I did just want to mention that not all fat is the same fat in your body.
yes. And also matters kind of like where it's placed around your organs or your limbs, etc.
Yes.
So I do want to say there are more accurate ways of taking body fat and there are less accurate ways. And some of these things are not just available to anybody. I've done a handful of these again because of my college experience and lab, and which was so fun. We just did different experiments with each other and to each other. So with that, the most accurate way to take body fat is underwater weighing or hydrostatic weighing. It wasn't in like all studies, but usually like when we read and looked at studies, in the methods section, it would tell you different ways they measured things on people before getting into the study and things like that. But there was some where, they did underwater weighing. Because basically you weigh yourself on dry land, you get in the pool. I was looking into it again because I've never done it. There's a chair that's like kind of half in the water, half out of the water. You sit in it and then you basically subtract that, and that's the fat in your body. And there's the bod pod, which is the second most accurate way to measure body fat. And I got to use this in college, going into my senior year, I think it was. The Kines labs got all redone at DePaul with a W, not DePaul. And it was like really fun and cool to get to use. Like, I wish I could go back there.
I did it too when I was going through school, not in undergrad, but in my dietetic internship. And I agree, it was so fascinating and yeah, really cool. But that's the only one. I also have not had the opportunity to do underwater weighing. And we'll talk about some other ones, but yeah, the bod pod's really cool.
Right. So far, I think that's been my favorite way. You are literally in like a spandex and sports bra, and I think you have to wear a little hair cap, which is hysterical and funny when you're in front of your fellow classmates. And you get into this pod in this chamber, and your body fat is calculated by measuring the amount of air your body displaces upon entering. And then at the end, you're in there for a few minutes and you need to be like really still. And then at the end, you actually blow into a tube and they calculate the air in your lungs. And it's a whole thing, which was honestly a really cool experience. And we got to do it a few times. And then the third is a DEXA scan, which I have never done this, but this one also includes like your muscle, I think, density. It creates a fat shadow image and shows the distribution of your fat in the abdomen, arms, limbs, etc. And I do know like Equinox has one. And then I think, Chelsea, you've shared a place with me in Chicago that has a couple of locations that also has one.
Yeah, there's if you're in Chicago, there's a place called Live Lean RX, I think. I've actually never been there. I have no association with them, but I've sent clients there and they have good things to say. So in Chicago, there is a location that does that. And usually what I'll do, because I work with clients all over, I do think DEXA scans, which I don't want to interrupt you too much, but I do think out of, like, if we're talking about underwater weighing, bod pod, and DEXA scans so far, DEXA scans are they're not necessarily the most reliable, but I think they're the most accessible. Would you agree with me on that?
Yes.
Okay. So kind of going back to that whole like readily accessible thing. So for clients who are interested in learning more about their body or their inside of their body or the breakdown, usually how I help them find a place is just doing research online to see in their area if a DEXA scan is available. And sometimes they're like standalone places that just do a lot of different metabolic testing. Sometimes it might be more of like a functional medicine clinic or a health club, something along those lines.
Yes, love it. And then the fourth most accurate is the InBody scale. And I personally don't love this one, but I have to say, like, I think some Lifetimes have them. Equinox had one, like East Bank in Chicago, another club might have one. Yeah, it's where you like step on it barefoot, you hold the hip things with your hands, and it takes like a minute or so. But what I've learned and my own thoughts and feelings, like, it gets more of your limbs and not your torso. And depending on the person, you can carry more fat in your torso. So it's not going to be as accurate then, because it's not properly measuring as much and as well as it could be.
Yeah, because it's using bioelectrical impedance, right?
Yes.
Yeah, which basically is currents, like electrical currents, that are running through your body and that are separating. Like if you think about it, we have water, we have muscle, we have fat, we have organs. So it's an algorithm essentially of these currents going through our body and the rate of how quickly they're moving. So to your
Yes.
point with the inaccuracy, if you think about it, if you're holding on with your hands and you're stepping on it with your feet, that's why it's accessing your limbs more, because that's what it's accessing first. It's traveling further to your torso.
Yes. Which I do have this app called Sculpt, and it is a handheld, like bioelectrical impedance tool. I don't know, to be honest, the accuracy on that, but I bought it. It was like $100. I've used it on myself. I have an app. It tells me like the health of my muscle, I think, probably how recovered it is and such, and my body fat, but nothing else. And that one, you put it on like your shoulder, you put it on your bicep, your forearm, your stomach, your back, your upper back, your butt, your quad, like you put it all over and you have to get it wet, you spray it. So if someone wants to really get into it, they could do that, and it's pretty affordable. But again, I don't fully know the accuracy of that one. And then there's the skin fold test, as I had mentioned earlier. Again, with like a 3.5 to 5% plus or minus kind of accuracy, inaccuracy. I will say with that one too, the more torso fat one has, that can be a little bit tougher because there are different types of fat and some can be firmer and harder to grab. And with skin fold testing, you want to make sure you're getting the fat and like your skin. You don't want to be grabbing anything else. So that can be the tough part about it. So you need someone that has done a lot of skin fold testing and that they do it the same way every time they test. And with the skin fold test, there's different parts of the body you can do it, and there's equations online. With all of these, truthfully, you, again, with just science and accuracy, you kind of want to make sure you do these things at the same time of day. You're the same amount of like hydrated for females, same time of the month, because there is error.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's also a data point. I think this gives more insight than BMI, but it's still not the end all be all to your health. It's just telling you a little bit more about your body. The other thing, you had already pretty much talked about this, but just for anyone who might be confused. So when you were talking about the InBody, so anyone who has a scale that also measures their body fat, like a scale at home, because I know those are really, really popular, or the handheld ones, like I know FFC in Chicago had the handheld ones. That's the same idea as the InBody you were saying. It's the bioelectrical impedance, but so the electrical currents. But again, as Sophie was saying, like with the InBody, you're stepping on it and you're holding on with your hands. So even though it's still not as accurate because of all the reasons Sophie said, if you think about it, if you're using one that you're just standing on or the opposite one that you're holding on to, it can also have pretty different readings because the one you're holding on to is sending a current through your arms versus the one that you're standing on is sending a current through your legs. So I know personally for me, like FFC actually had both. They had one that you held on to and one that you could stand on, not an InBody where you do both, but two different pieces of equipment, like a scale and then a handheld one. And my readings on both of those were literally night and day. I wish I still remembered them and had them written down because some women carry weight in their lower section. So most of my body fat is in my glutes, my hips, my legs, my lower half of my body. And on the upper half, like, yes, women listening, yes, of course we have boobs, but like I don't have these giant things. I probably shouldn't be saying that on here, but here we go. Anyways, so yeah, my long story short, my handheld body fat reading was always way lower than if I would stand on a scale. So basically, very much take those with a grain of salt. Not saying it's still like better than nothing, but yeah.
Yeah, well, with that, like Equinox had an InBody when I worked there, and I was a little too obsessive at the time, so I would do it like weekly. It was free. It was cool and nice to see. I mean, I love science and numbers, so I would do it a lot. And sometimes just from like one day to the next, it would be like 2 body fat percentages off. And I'm like, okay, well, like just so everybody knows, it's probably on the healthy side to lose like 1 to 2% body fat like a month. Like a whole 2% is like, that was just like, okay, like, yeah, this is inaccurate. Like I should just take the average of whatever I took this month.
Very similar to like weight on the scale, like we've talked about. It can
Yes.
fluctuate for a lot of different reasons, your hydration, when you last went to the bathroom, all of that type of stuff, time of month. So similar thing with these body fat scales as well. So I guess basically just to regroup for anyone interested, the scales you can like people can access online. I feel like a lot of the just general weight scales have body fat readings now. So I would say that's the most accessible, but there's a lot of, I don't really want to say error, but inaccuracy, I guess, maybe with those. And then you have like the in-body scale that is getting more of your body because you're stepping on it and holding on to it. Also, I think that's fairly accessible too, meaning like a lot of gyms have it and things like that. And then skin fold test, super accessible. It's more like the actual piece of equipment you can find anywhere. It's just finding someone to do it that is well trained. And then we had already talked about like DEXA scan, bod pod, and underwater weighing. DEXA scans for the average person. Usually you can find somewhere to purchase a test. I don't know this. I don't know if you know this, but like if someone were to want to do bod pod and underwater weighing, who, where, how? I don't
So
know that.
we got our bod pod from IU. So I honestly think you'd probably have to go to a university. So maybe like U of C at your doctor, Northwestern, or like Rush. Possibly like their labs would have one and you could try and get a hold of someone.
Isn't it
Um,
interesting to think about though that like from my knowledge, a lot of these, because I agree, they're mostly at like a university or yeah, a university or hospital or something, hospital university. But I feel like a lot of them are used for either A, schooling or B, research. Like I haven't ever, which if someone's listening to this and can correct us, like reach out to us and let me know. But like I've never heard of someone or known someone that reaches out to their doctor and says, "Can I get a bod pod test?" And they say, "Yeah, we'll send you here."
yeah, I mean
Right?
it would probably cost like $5,000.
But like, is it I mean, I guess it is, it has to be an option somewhere, but like,
I don't know, probably DEXA scan. Probably
yeah.
the computer system is cheaper and they can get more use out of it. Where a bod pod, you have to be like so trained. I mean, I've never done a DEXA scan again, but like the bod pod, the machine has to be calibrated. You have to do the breathing right. You have to be in there, right? Like so many things and factors. Like it's a big deal.
And same with underwater weighing. Like both of us have studied this stuff and neither of us have had the opportunity to do it. So I'm curious to like a lot of that I also feel like is done more for research or athletes. I don't know if like professional athletes have had the opportunity. I'm sure they have, but again, accessibility of it, I'm not familiar with.
Me either.
So yeah, just wanted to point that out because I didn't want people listening to this and being like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go find a place to go underwater weighing next week. Maybe if you can, if you find it, let us know
I'll
and let
come
us know
with.
where you live and what connections you have.
Yeah. And with that, also like take this data as, lightly or I guess as heavily as you'd like to, but again, data is not the end all be all. It's also like how you feel and living the life you want to live, and not being just so obsessive.
Yeah, I think the big reason we wanted to do this is because we hear a lot of questions and frustration and confusion around the talk of BMI and body fat. And actually, even just this week, I had a client say, like, well, what should my goal weight be? Because, and word for word, they said, because if I do it based on what a BMI chart is, and then they like told me the number, and I said, when's the last time you remember weighing that number? And they said, I don't, like probably elementary school or middle school. So again, it's really frustrating because for some people they think that this BMI chart is what someone should be weighing, and for a lot of different reasons. We had talked about body composition and all of that type of stuff, but it's just not always a good standard. And so that's the big reason we wanted to have this conversation, was just to let you know what it is, what the history of it is, tell you a little bit about body fat, and just educate you guys.
Yes, I love it. I love science. This brings me back to the old days.
Me too. I like being a nerd sometimes. Do we have a food for thought today?
Food for thought. Take everything like a grain of salt, tiny, and put it on your food and eat it. I'm kidding. I don't know if we have a food for thought.
Well, let's wrap this up. Thanks for tuning in.
No food for thought.
No, no food for thought today because we gotta go.
See you later.
Bye.